So I have said this year is all about proving that Brexit is some sort of success and that it is working and it is all going fine, nothing's going wrong. And then next year, Boris Johnson and the rest of his Brexiteers can sleep, shall we say, sneakily slip back into, shall we say, the DMs of Ursula von der Leyen and, so we say, try and renegotiate things. Maybe in these certain areas, maybe not be so hard. Maybe, shall we say, have more cooperation, because we've seen very recently, especially we saw in the big House of Parliament debate, and of course the fallout from Afghanistan, is a lot of not only our newspapers and even Brexit supporting newspapers have said that we should forget completely about the US special relationship that we have, that it is now no longer a thing, and that we should far more concentrate on being friends with France and Germany, which ultimately will mean having close relations and ties with the EU. Not what the Brexiteers want, because as I've said, I think it makes far more sense when you remember that, of course, Brexit was built on four key pillars. The first, that the EU would collapse when we left. Second of all, that we would maintain all the benefits of the single market with no downside. Third, we'd get this fantastic trade deal with the US. See the Atlantic Bridge, if you don't believe me for that. And of course, four, in case of Northern Ireland, because we'd had all that, we'd be able to do whatever we want and we'd be fine. Now, of course, these announcements, so we say, of these new trade envoys have come at a very timely, with, of course, we've seen massive delays and shortages with Nando's being closed, having to close 50 of its locations. McDonald's can no longer get milkshakes, and even Greggs are now struggling with supply chains, with about over 2,000 stores nationwide. So things are not going well. And as we always said, Brexit was always going to be a very slow car crash. And you've already had the fishermen crying betrayal right at the start of the year. The reason why we haven't covered them much is nothing's actually changed. They're still in just as much trouble as they were back then. Farmers are now starting to add their voices to the pile of, yes, we're going to really push hard to leave the EU because we want all these things. And of course, none of it is materializing for them. And it's very likely that they are going to get thrown on the bus under some of these new trade deals. And now these new trade envoys, which were, again, like I say, very nicely announced, to try and, shall we say, smooth over the, shall we say, these shortages that we are seeing in the country. Very, very timely, shall we say. But as we are about to go here with the Yorkshire bylines, they're just a massive waste of money. So before we do jump into this, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel. Sorry, I'm jumping far ahead there. So, like I said, this comes from the fantastic, as always, Yorkshire bylines. And of course, title is New Trade Envoys Are Just a Waste of Money. The announcement that the government had appointed over 10 new trade envoys to boost Britain's businesses around the world has been greeted with some skepticism. Not to mention the hilarity of Katie Hoey is apparently to be our trade envoy to Ghana, while Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the DUP leader, will take on Cameroon, and Ian Botham gets Australia. In terms of significance, Ghana and Cameroon collectively have an annual gross domestic product, or GDP, of about the same as the EU manages in just 2 days. But in Brexit, we have to casually cast aside the huge and deeply integrated trading relationship on our doorstep in favor of trying to export our opportunities to much smaller economies thousands of miles away in West Africa. The envoy roles are presumably part-time anyway, and none of the appointees seem to have much experience of any international trade. And welcome anything it is to try and help our exporters, they are not likely to make that much of a difference. Liz Truss seems to think that this is some sort of masterstroke. It isn't. It doesn't actually tell us something. We can deduce that the government has actually no idea what the problem is with UK exports, still less the solution to it. Anyone who's actually worked in the frontline sales of a British company will know how this works. The problem of inadequate or failing states is always down to the salesperson, and the answer is always to get a new salesperson or envoy. If you're rich enough, Boris Johnson essentially is the CEO of Great Britain PLC and is following in the footsteps of plenty of company leaders before him. The government is, in effect, telling British export salespeople that they haven't been trying hard enough. The Garnier or the Australian importers that they haven't looked properly into Britain's manufacturers. So the plan is to send an envoy to shout just a bit louder and tell the customers to change their glasses. Note that there is never any possibility that British products are not competitive or even world beating, or that Australian importers might have already reviewed UK suppliers and decided that they just weren't good enough. That is not, of course, how Britain doesn't have any world-class companies. Of course we do, but the problem is just not enough of them. Having spent the first half of my career, if you could call it that, working for British manufacturers, I know the reality. The figure at the top often is catapulted in by the shareholders, but with absolute no industry experience, and has an unshakable belief that the company's products are top drawer, capable of competing with anything being offered anywhere in the world. The sales are abysmal only because the people facing the customer are hopeless inadequates. The normal British boardroom situation is to recruit people who know little or nothing of the products or the markets, but wear sharp suits and are high profile, or can crack a few jokes and send them on trade missions to help far-flung places to try and sell machines or systems that are widely regarded as dogs. This is the thinking behind the 10 trade envoys. So let me make a prediction. They will all fail. And in fact, that is actually quite true. If you know anything about the business history behind Games Workshop, you'll know until very, very recently, they were in a bit of a bind. They weren't doing as anywhere near as they were doing recently, because they had a chairperson who they brought in was the guy who used to run, I think it was Marks and Spencer's, and he had no idea about how Games Workshop worked. He stopped a load of stuff that people loved about the company. They got rid of like the specialist games. They stopped doing, expanding armies or stuff like that. They got rid of a ton of stuff that people loved about, GW. And then, of course, the new guy who came in was, I think he used to be like the former chief financial executive, I believe it was Kevin Roundtree, before he came in. And he brought a ton of stuff back. And if you look, GW is now doing far better than it ever has been before, because again of that change of CEO. But anyway, like I say, that's again just to back up what he's saying. It is true about that. So ministers have convinced themselves that Britain produces, quote, the best in the world, and simply by making speeches claiming that repeatedly, that is so. In my own field of packaging systems, it is far from true. Continental Europe has many companies who are actually world leaders but just don't shout about it. Germany's Mittelstand, for example, is a fully owned, family-owned business that are acknowledged world leaders in their own niche fields, full of people who really understand their own businesses, investing in the long term in R&D, infrastructure, and employees, and exporting globally. In Italy, you can easily recognize the towns with thriving export businesses. They look wealthy, with millions of euros trickling in through to the local economy from overseas sales every year. And if you are really world leading, the customers already know who you are and will beat the path directly to your door. An envoy is just superfluous. When I finally began working for European companies, what surprised me was how little they actually relied on skill, determination of slick, fast-talking sales reps, rounds of golf, expensive lunches, or indeed politically appointed envoys. They placed a lot more faith in simply finding out what the market wanted and, more importantly, what they were prepared to pay for it. And of course, they then designed the systems that offered real benefits that justified the cost. Every salesperson of high-value capital equipment knows how it feels to lose an order to a competitor after a month or years of effort. It is just not fun, especially knowing that the job might be half your annual target. It hurts, and it is quite apt from the handsome commission. By gathering and offering feedback about the customer's reasoning, especially when a more expensive European manufacturer has won the order, is a good way to learn. Sadly, this learning is too often lost on British CEOs. Customers who might want things your company just can't provide are often seen as awkward or difficult. You're told to go and find customers who want the standard Mark 1, preferably in black. I was advised to do this more than once. The message is that the market is wrong to want anything that you don't supply. This is the Brexiteers' view of Europe when they complained about that our exports were falling and why Ghana and Cameroon seemed such tempting targets. Any salesperson worth their salt, where they were at least in the pecking order, either you're at the bottom emphasizing low cost, or you're at the top selling quantity, reliable, perhaps novel methods at a much higher prices. Selling at the cheap end often means the first order is a very easy win. Getting a second after the customer realizes what they bought is difficult, if not impossible. Eventually, you run out of customers, and the reverse is true of quality. The first order is hard, and it may easily fail, but subsequent ones fall into your lap just as your customer base is continually expanding. Too often, the reaction in UK companies to losing an order, even to a more expensive supplier, is to reduce costs, make a product a little worse and sell it cheaper, and to advertise for a salesperson, often referred to as a self-starter. Code for you're on your own, don't expect any help. My own experience in Europe was clever, serious, confident companies designing and manufacturing machines and systems that looked great, worked first time, and reliable and supported by experienced engineers, usually multi-skilled and multilingual, backed by a family prepared to look beyond that year's profit and loss account in order to achieve long-term success. None of them needed envoys. Unless Global Britain actually gets its act together, we will eventually run out of countries to export to, no matter how many envoys we have. I do sort of agree on that. I mean, that is very much it tells you a lot, essentially, about the business landscape, really, in the UK, that lots of British companies do work like that, and it is not good. And that, if anything, what we need is an entire shakeup of like the UK business structure as to how we do it, and that we need to do things more European. And I think I think a lot of businesses are going to struggle unless they adapt. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of businesses really struggle, especially starting next year. I think that is when Brexit is really going to bite, because a lot of companies have like massive war chests that can last, at least built to last, like, 2 to 3 years. I won't say the name, but I was in an interview with a company very recently who basically said, it doesn't matter if we don't make any sales for like the next 2 years. We've got the cash to carry on. But that's how many companies tend to operate, and that's far more indictment of the business minds in Britain rather than Brexit. But of course, Brexit is going to cause a lot of these businesses to hurt massively, and that is why a lot of the European companies outrank and can run rings around a lot of the British companies. But there you go. Like I say, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all